My latest mission assigned me an alien girl I couldn't turn away from. Captain Jake Morrison never expected his routine patrol mission to turn into something that would change everything he thought he knew about the universe and himself. The distress signal came through on a Tuesday morning while his ship drifted near the outer colonies, and Jake, being the only vessel in range, had no choice but to respond. Even though every instinct told him this was going to be complicated, when he found the damaged pod floating in the debris field, his scanners showed one life form inside, and he brought it aboard without hesitation, because that was what humans did even out here in the cold darkness of space. The pod opened with a hiss of escaping air, and what emerged made Jake take an involuntary step backward, not from fear but from sheer amazement at what stood before him. She was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, with skin that shimmered like moonlight on water, and eyes that held the depth of entire galaxies within them. And when she looked at him, something inside his chest tightened in a way he had never experienced before. Her name was Lyra, or at least that was the closest his translator could approximate, and she explained in a voice like music that her research vessel had been attacked by raiders who wanted the valuable data she carried about a newly discovered energy source. Jake should have just dropped her at the nearest station, filed his report, and moved on with his life. But when she asked if he could help her complete her mission, something made him agree, before his rational mind could object. Over the next few days, as they traveled together, Jake learned that Lyra was a scientist from a species called the Valari who had been studying human behavior from afar for decades, and she admitted with what he thought might be embarrassment that humans fascinated her people because of their unusual capacity for both great destruction and incredible compassion. Watched everything he did with those luminous eyes, asking questions about why humans drank coffee, or why he kept a photo of his family on the control panel, or why he always made sure the ship's recycling systems were running at peak efficiency, even when it would be easier to just dump waste. Jake found himself explaining human nature in ways he never had before, telling her about how his grandfather had taught him that taking care of small things meant you could handle big things, and how his sister always said that coffee was just an excuse for people to take a moment to breathe. Lyra listened to everything with an intensity that made him feel like every word mattered, and she shared stories about her own world, where oceans glowed with bioluminescence and cities floated on air currents and music was considered a form of mathematics. The turning point came when they were ambushed by the same raiders who had attacked her before, and Jake knew his small patrol ship could not outgun them. But he also knew he could not let them take Lyra or her research. He made a decision that surprised even himself, telling Lyra to take the escape pod while he led the raiders away, and she refused with a firmness that reminded him she was not some helpless being who needed saving, but a person with her own strength and determination. Together they came up with a plan that used her knowledge of energy fields and his experience with combat tactics, and when it worked, Jake felt a rush of exhilaration that had nothing to do with surviving and everything to do with the way Lyra smiled at him with triumph in her eyes. After they escaped, Jake knew he should take her to her destination and say goodbye, but the thought of never seeing her again created an ache in his chest that he could not ignore. Lyra seemed to sense his hesitation, and she told him something that made his heart race even faster, which was that her people had a saying about how the universe sometimes brings two stars together in a dance that changes both of them forever. She asked if humans had similar beliefs, and Jake thought about all the poetry and songs and stories his species had created about connection and fate, and finding someone who made the universe make sense. He told her that humans believed in taking chances even when the odds seemed impossible, and that the best things in life often came from the most unexpected places. Lyra moved closer to him in the small cockpit, and Jake noticed details he had tried not to see before, like the way her hair seemed to move with its own subtle energy, or how her presence made the air feel charged with possibility. She placed her hand over his, and even though their biologies were completely different, Jake swore he could feel her pulse matching his own rhythm. They talked through the night about what it would mean for a human and a Valari to choose each other, knowing that both their societies would have opinions and regulations and concerns about such an unprecedented connection. But Jake had spent his whole life following rules and doing what was expected, and for once he wanted to do something just because it felt right in a way that went beyond logic or reason. Lyra admitted that she had been drawn to him from the moment she saw him through the pod's window, and that every interaction since had only deepened that pull, until she could not imagine continuing her journey without him beside her. When they finally reached her destination, instead of saying goodbye, Jake made a request to his superiors for extended leave to serve as a liaison for human-Volari relations, and to his surprise they approved it, perhaps sensing that something significant was beginning. Lyra's research was delivered safely and she was celebrated by her people, but Jake noticed that she kept looking back at him during the ceremonies as if making sure he was still there. Later, when they were alone on a balcony overlooking the glowing Volari ocean, she told him that her people had a tradition where two beings who chose each other would share their greatest fear. As a sign of trust, Jake took a breath and admitted that his greatest fear was that one day he would wake up and realize this was all a dream, and she would be gone. Lyra's eyes grew bright with emotion, and she shared that her greatest fear was that the universe would demand they choose between their bond and their duties to their respective worlds. He pulled her close and promised that whatever came they would face it together, because humans did not give up on the things that mattered, and she mattered more than anything else ever had. She whispered against his shoulder that the Volari had a word for what they had found, which translated roughly to Starbound, and that such connections were considered sacred and worth any sacrifice. As the twin moons rose over the alien ocean, Jake realized that his mission had given him something far more valuable than he ever expected. Not just an alien girl he could not turn away from, but a future he had never dared to imagine was possible.